And we're back for part 2. I'm sorry if it's a little disjointed, but I don't know when I'm running out of time. The camera I'm using right now does not have the articulating screen, so I can't see the time. I can't keep track. Technological difficulties are going to come. Where do we leave off? Well, we were talking about Asians as a model minority, right? And we were real proud of this research. Maddox, Galinsky, Cootie, and I did this research together. Most stereotyping research in the past had been about how does the negative stereotype affect people's attitudes towards a group. In this case, what we're doing is looking how does a positive stereotype affect attitudes towards the group. So we asked these survey questions, and the first thing why did we use this tool at this point in time? Because we wanted to see if the relationship existed. That's all we need to know. Do people actually believe that Asians can represent a threat when they outperform us? And the answer was yes, right? So we found a strong correlation that belief in Asian American superiority was associated with negative attitudes towards Asian Americans. But it wasn't that simple, and the survey results analyzed for their correlation didn't tell us why, and we want to understand why. So this is where I was saying multiple methods build huge studies or build good studies. The correlational relationship told us there was a relationship between attitudes towards Asians and their perceived seniority. But we want to talk causality. We want to say, what is the what's so behind this? How does it operate? So we needed to conduct an experiment. And this is where experimental research comes in. So again, we bring people into the laboratory, different people, different group of people, right? And we're going to develop an independent variable, right? This is what the experimenter manipulates, remember from the earlier part. And the dependent variable, that is what is influenced by the manipulation, right? And that's what we compare. So what we did is we made it real for our Ohio State participants. We had them read a story about, right, being in a science class and having to work with a partner. So the idea is, what's the stereotype for Asians in science or math? That they kick ass, right? And so the idea was, by having them work with a partner, if they get to work with an Asian partner, they should feel pretty good about Asians, right? But if they feel like they're competing against Asians, they don't get to work with an Asian partner, then they might feel that their grade might be jeopardized as a result, right? So the partner's name, the independent variable, when you read this story, hey, you're in a science class and you've been partnered with so-and-so, what we did is manipulated their belief in the ethnicity of their partner. Yoshi, Japanese name, according to Ohio State participants. And how do we know that? Well, we know that because what we did, I would come into class, some morning I would come into class and I would have like 30 pre-printed questionnaires, and it basically said there'd be 20 Asian sounding names on it and said, please rate these upon how Asian these names sound on a scale of 1 to 10. And of the 20 names we presented, Yoshi was endorsed as the most Asian sounding name to Ohio State participants. So we used Yoshi as one of the names. What ethnicity do you think Jamal represents? It was African American, and again, it was developed in the same way. And then Tom, well, of course, that's the white name, right? And that was developed in the same way. So 20 participants endorsed Yoshi as most Asian, 20 different participants, Jamal, the most African American sounding of the names we dreamed up, and Tom, the most white, for a different 20 participants. Notice, we've already run, a couple hundred participants, and this is as far as we've gotten in the study. Thank God we're at Ohio State, where there's just literally hundreds of participants. So the participant then was asked about their attitude towards Asians. And the results, well, participants that were randomly assigned to the condition where their partner was Yoshi thought they would be more successful in the class, and they rated Asians more favorably, thus supporting our hypothesis that when put in competition with Asians, people are more likely to have negative attitudes towards Asians than if people are put into a cooperative situation with Asians, which then they develop a more favorable attitude towards Asians. The experimental research then points to the cause, because notice the only thing that was different for those three groups of participants, the Yoshis, the Jamals, or the Toms, the only thing that was different in their worlds for the half hour they participated in this experiment, the only thing that was different was the name. So if we see any difference in attitude towards Asians, it's the result of the difference in name, nothing else. The difference in name caused the different results. Caused. So we established the causal mechanism. And that's the beauty of experimental research. That's why we're as social psychologists, so wedded to experimental laboratory research, because it allows us to talk about cause. Okay? So to be an experiment, right, it must ensure that random assignment to experimental conditions, because I want 20 people in each condition, and because they're randomly assigned, I have some people who are prejudiced who come to my laboratory. I have some people who are very egalitarian. I have some people who are in between. But notice, when I use random assignment, Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3 should have the same number of prejudiced and egalitarian people, same number of prejudiced and egalitarian people, same number. So the individual differences, the aspects that people of themselves bring to the lab, cancel out. They're not part of the observed result. And that's the beauty of random assignment to experimental conditions, right? It's absolutely necessary, and it's the most critical aspect. All of the features of this experiment must be identical, and that's the experimental control. So everyone got the same story. The absolute same story. The temperature was the same in the lab every time it was run, right? We greeted people the same way. We debriefed people the same way. We got people's informed consent in the same way. The only thing that differed for those experimental participants was that name in the story they read, right? Uh-oh. Now, I've just talked about canceling out individual differences or the personality that people bring with them, right? But now Lewin's going to look at me and say, yeah, but what about the P? You know, you manipulated the environment, right, at 3 different levels in that experiment, and you observed the behavior, but what about the person element? What about the person variable? Well, if we so choose, and we believe it becomes necessary, we can record the person aspect. We could easily then look at, we could give people's, let's say, a questionnaire to determine their motivation to not appear prejudiced before they do the study. And then we can use that information about the person and see how it interacts with the environmental aspect that we manipulated. So a good social psychologist is prepared to understand important person qualities and perhaps measure those, and then manipulate the environment to see the effect. Notice, we can't manipulate the person qualities. So P is typically measured, E is typically manipulated within a standard social psychological study. Okay? So individual differences such as gender, ethnicity, religiosity, if we believe it might make a difference, then we can measure it and see if it does in fact affect our results or not. And often it doesn't. Probably more often than not, it doesn't affect the results. Differences that are recorded rather than manipulated are called moderator variables. I used that term earlier. So gender is a typical moderator. People ask, well, are the effects the same for men as they are for women? And what the person is questioning, the question means, does gender moderate the observed effect, somehow change it, right? For example, and let's use the gender example. Are men and women equally likely to punch out the experimenter when they're insulted in the laboratory? Right? And then gender is being used as a moderator variable. Okay? And that's about it. Now, note, your text had a lot more to say about experimental research. You need to read your text. I'm going to remind you in these first couple lecturettes, you can't do this course without reading the text, and ideally you read the text before you view the lecturettes. Okay? So you got to do both. Remember, your quizzes are largely based on material in the text. Your assignments, for the most part, are based on the lecturettes, right? So it's a two-prong approach here. Make sure to cover your butt and involve yourself in both. And you like the zinnias? Last year's zinnias, next year's zinnias. I mean, this year's zinnias are on their way up. They're about this big now. No flowers yet, just the plants. But in case you didn't know, I love to garden. And I also love cats. What do you think, Annika? Do you love being a cat? Huh? She's pissed off now. I woke her up. All right. See you in a couple whenever you're ready.